So it looks like Blizzard is going to be doing a lot of big changes to rogues. They are already talking about the upcoming class fantasy changes for the patch 7.2.5. So 7.2.5 is going to be hitting PTR, I'm pretty sure, pretty soon. And what they're thinking is changing the class fantasy for all three specs. I'm right now reading all this, and I just got the information just now on MMO Champion, also can be found on Wowhead. And I'm looking through this, and this is something interesting. For a while, people have voiced their opinions on Legion, whether they like the new changes to Subtlety, Assassination, and Outlaw, going from combat to an Outlaw, and people that didn't like these changes. A lot of issues came up, like for example, for me it was kind of like, is it dot, or is it burst, is it bleeds, or is it poisons? When it comes to Assassination, then it's like this mobile but not as bursty, weird, not as roguey Subtlety. And then there's Outlaw with the obvious roll the bones mechanic. And Blizzard is addressing some of these things right here and right now. So with Assassination, what they talked about is there's not as much of like diversity in terms of your playstyles. In most cases, you either try to figure out what's more powerful, poisons or bleeds, at least for like PvE, but also for PvP, and you roll with that build. In the beginning of Legion, at the very beginning, even back on the beta, Exsanguinate and Hemorrhage and the bleed based build was the build that everybody ran. And then people started switching to Master Poisoner and even Agonize and Poison for PvE. And now with the tier 20 set that's coming out in Legion, it looks like it's going to be going back to bleeds, especially with some of the changes like Garrote getting a flat damage buff thanks to your artifact weapon. So Blizzard is talking a bit about poisons and bleeds and how they don't really offer you that much difference in playstyle. You either go on all bleeds to basically do the same thing, which is mostly single target with some cleave capability, not a strong AoE, or poisons, again, single target, some cleave capability, not a strong AoE. And they don't really like that. They want to be able to distinguish some talents that are better for single target and some for AoE, some that are bleed based and some that are poison based. So we might actually have a spread between bleeds and poisons in terms of customizing your character to be more AoE friendly or more single target friendly, which will be awesome because then you can have multiple different playstyles. You can have a build for PvE when it comes to Mythic Plus dungeons where you need a lot of AoE, raiding for single target, and PvP you could have a mix of single target and AoE for specific situations. And I think this is actually kind of a cool idea that they're going about it. Some of the talents they're talking about, for example, is Agonize and Poison. What they don't like about Agonize and Poison is how it's an invisible buff and it replaces Deadly Poison, which is part of the core Assassination Rogue playstyle, to have a taking poison. Agonize and Poison is just a flat buff in terms of like how much damage someone's taken from you. It is invisible. It is not as fun, and it takes a long time for it to be stacked up on a target, and it's terrible for AoE. So they want to maybe take that buff out. But they talked about another talent on the same row that's kind of like functional, that actually is serving the purpose they like. Exsanguinate is what they said is actually a really good talent. It has a clear theme in terms of having your bleeds and being a bleed spec, and it's all about taking those bleeds as fast as possible. They don't want to change it a little bit to maybe give it a small energy cost because of the damage that it provides, and so a global cooldown ability, and that sometimes causes you to energy cap. So it'll be like you spend energy in order to gain a lot of energy, so then it doesn't feel a little bit clunky to use it. And I'm pretty sure this is mostly for PvE purposes, but because PvP is so close to PvE in terms of like how it blends and how classes react to one another, I really do think that this is going to be just fine for PvP. This is overall good news. If Blizzard is going to be customizing Assassination to be more of a, you know, let's say you go on a BG and you're thinking like, okay, so there's going to be some situations where players are going to stack. Maybe I can get some kind of an interesting build in there. And there was a bleed build back in the day where on Rupture, if you ruptured somebody, every time Rupture ticks, has a chance to tick, and every time it ticks around anybody else, it's like infected wounds kind of deal. It spreads that same Rupture tick to other people. So you could rupture somebody, and if they're in a group together, has a chance to spread to another person and to another person. Now you have the whole team bled up for bleeds, but you had to choose a talent for it instead of compared to some of the other talents that were better for single target DPS. This was more of an AoE talent to put ruptures on everybody, literally everybody. And then we come in, Phantom Knives to make sure everybody has a bleed or poison combination together, and then you have a ton of energy. Now you can just literally burst and destroy the whole team. I think it was kind of fun stuff like that, and hopefully we'll see something good for this. And definitely, if you guys are a favorite of somebody who plays Assassination, you definitely should start voicing your opinions on PTR as soon as possible, and download the PTR if not, if you unless you can't. And then if you can't, come to my videos because I'll be probably playing PTR, checking this stuff out. Now I want to talk a bit about Outlaw because this is the next spec they have. They talked about the pirate theme and how they like it, and as a spec itself, they feel like the fantasy of the spec was pretty cool and pretty accurate, but there are plenty of players that don't like it. And one of the major things that they want to do is rebalance Roll the Bones. So the idea with Roll the Bones is it's a question of how strong should a single buff be. How many buffs should you play with? Maybe we should have, instead of 6 dice, 5 dice. Well, that solved the issue because you're having a different probabilities numbers to work with in like a Yahtzee kind of playstyle. So you would have like options of 79% for 1 buff, 20% for a 2 buff, and a 1% for a 5 buff Yahtzee kind of build. But they're not quite sure if that will really fix it. In the end, what they did say, and that's just a TLDR for everybody, what they want to do is make sure that Roll the Bones doesn't define the Outlaw Rogue spec. It doesn't make it or break it. They want to make it so it's a viable option, or like as the Roll the Bones mechanic is a viable mechanic, but it is replaceable with Slice and Dice. They don't want Roll the Bones to be the definition of an Outlaw Rogue. And I feel like this could be good things, because in most of the times, at least for PvP, I feel like I'm basically defined by True Baron mechanic. If I don't get the True Baron buff, I'm more or less useless and there's no point in me popping cooldowns. But it would be kind of cool if like Roll the Bones was just something you would maintain, but it wasn't something that was affecting your gameplay. Well, of course, you know, without completely destroying me via my viability for balance in PvP, but that's a whole nother story. They also want to smooth out the energy generation for rogues, for Outlaw in particular, and I guess I can kind of see this. This is actually a really good buff for PvP because they basically want to make Adrenaline Rush not give as much energy regen as it used to, but make Combat Potency proc twice as often. So in sustained damage, Outlaw Rogues should see a lot more energy. This is actually a really good buff for PvP whenever you don't have your buffs up, so you can maintain your buffs, generate common points, generate finishers, generate CC, Roll the Bones, or Slice and Dice, whatever they end up doing with it. But basically they want to change up Roll the Bones. They're going to be doing a pretty big overhaul, so I'll be pretty happy to see how it goes. We have no idea what it's going to look like in the end. We can only speculate, but they want to make it less definition based for this spec of Outlaw, which is a good thing. Now, let's talk a bit about Subtlety. So one of the things I want to address, there's actually 3 things in particular that I want to address with Subtlety: Shadow Dance, Nightblade, and Shadow Strikes. First thing with Shadow Dance, they received a lot of comments from players playing Subtlety, and to no surprise, a lot of players said that Subtlety doesn't feel as bursty, because Shadow Dance used to be a 1-minute cooldown, and during Shadow Dance you'd be able to line up massive burst. So what they're trying to do is give you options to make it spammy, as something basically like a buff you maintain, like how you currently do right now in Legion, or make it something bursty. And I actually think it's a good idea. Basically, they want to put it down to 2 charges and make it so that you don't get your cooldowns back for Shadow Dance as fast, because, you know, if you spend common points to a finisher, you shave off a little bit of a CD for your Shadow Dance, so you can make it a 2 charge and make it, I guess, less likely to come up because you're reducing its cooldown recovery rate, I guess, in a way, with every single common point you miss in a finisher. So basically you can keep Subtlety Shadow Dance as a burst button with 2 charges, or you can forego that and make it, let's say, 3 stack and have a fairly short cooldown for it and an ability to reduce its cooldown, so it's more of a buff to maintain. So you have options, whether you want it to be bursty or you want it to be like sustained damage. Then I talked a bit about Nightblade. Now Nightblade, I talked about it in few situations. For a second, first of all, let's talk a bit about it mechanically, like PvE, which will kind of lead you to what they're trying to do with it. Single target works fine, but like, let's say you're in a group of players, you just spam AoE Nightblade, AoE Nightblade, AoE Nightblade, because with every single AoE you just generate full common points as long as there's enough players present, and now you have everybody dotted up with Nightblade. Blizzard doesn't like that. They don't want that because it is kind of a boring playstyle. But they are thinking is change up Subtlety, because Subtlety isn't really dot playstyle, shouldn't really be dot based. So they thought of something cooler. What if every single time you use Shuriken Storm, which I guess you're a fan of knives, your damage of your next eviscerate is increased and it stacks. So every time you're using Shuriken Storm back to back to back to back in a group of people, now your next eviscerate is going to deal a ton more damage. So then it pushes Nightblade kind of the other way and makes the spec a little bit more fun, a little bit more bursty, a little bit more subtlety, a little bit more what Subtlety used to be about. Not really by the words of subtlety, which basically means stealth, more or less, and secrecy and shit. But, you know, but more fun, what Subtlety used to be really about. And separately, they kind of just want to take away Nightblade. Didn't really like it for a rogue fantasy. They did want to separate Assassination and Subtlety by having one be all about bleed spec and the other about shadow damage, but that didn't work out. And they kind of want to go back to giving utility poisons back, which I actually would be fine with, because if they give back utility poisons, then they can kind of like reduce the this mysteriousness, spell slinger sort of rogue playstyle from it, and see if they can kind of give back something interesting, something cool, maybe even change their talents overall, because Subtlety talents right now are kind of just meh. I don't really see anybody in the Blizzard department like really pushing to make certain talents viable. There's really just not that many playable builds for PvP or PvE. You basically just spam Shadow Dance, Shadow Strike, Nightblade, Finisher, Eviscerate. That's kind of all you do. So by removing all those magical things and maybe adding utility poison into it, you can give a little bit more interesting mechanics to Subtlety Spec. Another change is Shadow Strike. With Shadow Strike, they're talking a little bit about mostly PvE. In terms of like, let's say you're positioning with a boss, right? Let's say you're in a good position with a boss and you Shadow Strike in the back to back to back. The boss turns a little bit or gets too far away from you and bam, you teleport into an awkward position. And that's really their argument. For PvP though, Shadow Strike is kind of like one of those buttons where you can like literally AFK and just spam Shadow Strike and you'll keep teleporting after the person. And while it's cool and fun just, you know, being able to be mobile as all hell, I guess they're also going to end up turning down mobility. They're thinking of bringing back Ambush, and while keeping Shadow Strike at the same time, you would have options between Shadow Strike and Ambush. You will move Shadow Strike to like a 30-second cooldown, back up to 25-yard range. It basically would be a Shadow Step Ambush. So Shadow Strike is a Shadow Step Ambush in a single button. Maybe give it like 2 charges, maybe make it so that it has the same energy cost for it and still requires stealth, so it would require you to have Shadow Dance available, and make Subtlety more about ambushes, just ambushing enemies back to back, but keep the same damage of an ambush. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I feel like if they were to bring Subtlety back to kind of like how it was, let's say in WoW or MoP or even Kata, give back poisons, make it more about like, you know, maintaining a bleed so the enemy takes more damage kind of playstyle. I don't even know what they would do, because back then they had Find Weakness. I don't think they would even bring that back. I highly doubt it, but I don't really know. I feel like they've kind of gone down rabbit hole with Subtlety so far. It'd be kind of interesting to see where it goes. And by interesting, I mean it could possibly be really boring, because I feel like they took a lot of key things that made Subtlety really fun and difficult at the same time to play for PvP. And I'm just not sure how they're gonna end up coming back out of it. I will love to see what they do, but I feel like they might have just stripped it too much, and the whole Shadow Strike with Nightblade and Eviscerate kind of fits currently. But when you remove that and basically give Subtlety ambushes back to back to back, but then you would bring back the poisons, maybe you might have someone that you might be able to work here. But does that take away or add to the Spec fantasy? Because again, this whole discussion is mostly about the fantasy of the Spec. Even the article says Rogue Class Fantasy Insight and upcoming changes. With Subtlety, I don't even know what to say, to be honest. I'm stuck, more or less. I'm not really sure how would they go about fixing it. If they were to go back and revert it to another expansion, that would be one way, but I highly doubt they will. So then it's like, okay, so what are they gonna do now? It's gonna be about a rogue Spec that has to go to Shadow Dance and then ambush, eviscerate. And that's all you do. Do you bring in bleeds then instead of Nightblade? What do the bleeds do? Do they add the damage increase? Is it just bleeds? What do the poisons bring? And I think that's kind of where the utility poisons, that's gonna be an interesting one. How can they make utility poisons? Because they could actually make utility poisons really good in terms of like what they bring to the table. But then you kind of walk in the closed line of what's the difference between Subtlety and Assassination is supposed to be the poison bleed master. What do you give Subtlety? I don't know, but what are your guys' thoughts? I'll be checking all this stuff out on PTR as soon as it comes out, so whenever it's available, I'll be one of the first few people covering it as soon as I can. Trust me on that one. Otherwise than that, I think I'm done for the video. So let me know what you guys' thoughts on Assassination, on Outlaw, and Subtlety. I like to hear literally everything, because I don't really know how to phrase a question here. Just what are your thoughts on some of these changes? And of course, I'll have a link for everything down in the description below as usual. So this is exciting, but this is also like, huh? Because one of the things that they did, what is it? It was back in patch 7.1 when Outlaw Rogue was really viable and fun. And then patch 7.1.5 rolled out and I was like, oh crap, Outlaw kind of sucks. But then towards the end of patch 7.1.5, I was like, okay, I got a team and Outlaw is now viable again. And now patch 7.2, Outlaw is super fucking good in PvP right now. What the hell is going to happen after patch 7.2.5? Should I get my 2400 now and just sit on it for the rest of the ratings or whatever? I don't really know. We'll just have to see. But this is good changes. I guess this is good. I feel like change is good unless they fuck the specs and the class up completely. Anyway, guys, I think this is it for me. Thanks for watching. Comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.